Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of A Quick Pint. Now, we're still on Sex Week here at the Jolly Heretic Public House, and you've been asking me to tell you about the origins of fetishes. But before I go into that, ladies and gentlemen, I've got something exciting to tell you, which is that there are exciting developments afoot here at the Jolly Heretic Public House. We have launched a Substack with a veritable smorgasbord of exclusive content that's going to be uploaded. You will find vlogs, you will find in-person interviews with jolly interesting people, you will find articles, you will find audiobooks, and much more. So click on the link in description and join the Jolly Heretic Substack mailing list today. But anyway, fetishes. What are the evolutionary origins of fetishes? How do fetishes work? A fetish, or the more usual term these days, is a paraphilia, is a situation where a person is sexually aroused by anything other than a normal, healthy, sexually developed person, to the extent that it is exclusive, to the extent that they cannot really be aroused by anything else, and such that therefore it kind of causes them problems, and it's really a kind of obsession. It's something that bothers them and that they think about all the time. So there is a difference between having a penchant for something, for something that's not entirely vanilla, shall we say, and having a fetish or a paraphilia. A fetish or a paraphilia is where this thing that arouses you, that is not a sexually mature member of the opposite sex, or increasingly in literature they would also add of your own sex. They don't regard homosexuality as a fetish. That this is an obsession, that it dominates everything, and that it's basically necessary to achieve arousal. Now, in the literature on who is more likely to develop sexual fetishes divides into two essential groups, really. The first is those who are high in sociosexuality. I have an ongoing dispute with someone that watches this channel that I'm wrong about this, but that's what the literature is saying. Sociosexuality, that is to say, really a kind of an R strategist, a person who is very, very sexually promiscuous and really, really enjoys sex, invests a great deal of their energy in sex rather than nurture. A person who is high in sociosexuality, has lots of sex with lots of people, becomes very, very easily sexually aroused, is heightened really in their sexuality, and therefore develops fetishes to the extent that they're just really strongly aroused by lots and lots of things that ordinary people would not be aroused by. But the particular fetish that is associated with sociosexuality is S&M, is sadomasochism. And this makes sense in terms of the R strategy idea, the idea that if you're evolved to an unstable yet dangerous ecology, then from a male perspective, the only way you will be able to pass on your genes is by dominating the female. The only way the female will be sure that you are the right person that she should allow to impregnate her, and that you will produce offspring which will be extremely violent and dangerous and physically formidable and so on, is that you can dominate her. And so and often in those kinds of circumstances, one way that people tend to pass on their genes is via rape. So it follows, if you are a man, you have to be able to basically engage in rape. You have to be able to be prepared to use violence in order to attain sex, and it follows that it would be useful for you to be sexually aroused by violence, and therefore it follows that you would develop, if you were going to develop a fetish and you were that kind of person, you would become a sadist. You would be sexually aroused by violence, because it would be useful in prehistory to be sexually aroused by violence. Similarly, sociosexual females, if they're going to develop a fetish, tend to develop masochism, in much the same way, this gets back to something, there's evidence that up to 66% of females have rape fantasies, and this is the idea that, again, if you want to pass on your genes in a very unstable yet dangerous ecology, then of course this will, and the only way you can be sure that the male is the right male for you, is the male that's going to give you the children that you want and that will survive, is that he can dominate you. Ultimately he can dominate you, and therefore it makes sense that there will be a sense in which you will be sexually aroused by the idea of being dominated. You'll be prepared to, at the given point, let yourself be dominated rather than fight to the death. because then, of course, you will ultimately pass on your genes. And so it follows that such women will be more likely to have rape fantasies, and there is a relationship between sociosexuality and having rape fantasies, but also that they would develop a fetish with regard to masochism. So that's the first group then. People that are high in sociosexuality will tend to develop sadomasochistic fantasies. The second group is those that are high in autism. We've discussed autism many times on the channel before. Autistics are people that are that they take in a great deal of information. They are hypersensitive to the world around them. They feel sensations and so forth extremely strongly. They are obsessed with order and structure and so forth and systematizing. Because they take in so much information, they experience the world as a kind of swirling chaos, and therefore they become obsessed with systematizing and making sense of an order. And they are relatively low in empathy, in the sense that they have very poor theory of mind, but they are high in systematizing and noticing details. Autism crosses over with basically being high in testosterone. People that are high in autism are high in masculinized traits. They tend to have more masculinized brains, more masculinized bodies. They are higher, essentially, in autism. There's evidence that they have a higher sex drive, that they become sexually aroused more easily, and because they feel these intense feelings. This includes intense sexual feelings, which other people do not feel with the same intensity. They make strong sexual connections and so forth, and also they tend to be obsessed with things like with scripts and order, and they become very, very easily obsessed in general. They're highly obsessional because of the way in which they want to make sense of this overstimulating world which they experience. And they're very interested in objects as well, things like parts of the body and things like this. Now you can see how this can move over into developing a sexual fetish. An ordinary man might, be a breast man who likes breasts or likes bottoms or likes legs or whatever, whereas for the autistic it will be fundamental, it will be essential to him being able to become sexually aroused, that he can see or feel or whatever, something like this. An ordinary person might be slightly turned on if they're sociosexual, let's say, by S&M. For the autistic, it might become an obsession, in which that he is an extreme sadomasochist, because he easily develops, or she easily develops, these sexual associations. And so you can see how they would develop such associations. If I give you an example, there's a book called Sex and Shakespeare, which has been written by a female who Gillian Keenan, who seems to me to be obviously to be high in autism traits, and she's a spanking fetishist, and she's very, very specifically aroused by being spanked. Now, how would this sexual fetish develop? Well, you can see how it would develop. It develops in so much as we discussed in an earlier video. Where does this ultimately come from? This process? Well, it's a power dynamic. It's two monkeys and one who are having a fight, and one monkey places himself in the position of submission to the other monkey, i.e. bends over to alleviate the tension, and then the other monkey mounts him. Now, Desmond Morris argues that that's the ultimate origins of spanking. That's where it comes from. That it's the power dynamic of that, which is where it comes from. Now, you can see how this could become sexually arousing to a female of this kind, because it clearly involves being dominated, because it involves a sexual part of the body, i.e. the buttocks, and the stimulation of them, and with a person that is very, very high, feels sensations very, very strongly, and really strongly makes sexual associations, you can see how such a woman would become sexually aroused by that, and that it would develop, if she was obsessional, into an actual fetish, and that she would see it as more of a part of her sexuality than sex itself. So that's an example of how these fetishes can develop in the context of autistic people. Another bit of evidence, it relates to the first two really, is that autistic people are more likely to suffer from trauma, because this is mediated by neuroticism. Autistics are more likely to feel negative feelings strongly and so forth. If you feel negative feelings strongly, you're more likely to develop a trauma, essentially. And there is evidence that trauma can kind of knock you off what's called canalization. So sexuality, basically everything has to go right environmentally for sexuality to go right, and for you to ultimately develop into a sexually normal adult. Now, what can happen is that things can knock you off this, such as some kind of massive trauma of being sexually abused, or a parent dying at a formative age, or something like that. But normally people go back on it again, and they eventually get back on the right path. And the argument is there's some sort of problem with canalization with those that develop these sexual fetishes. They get knocked off and they cannot come back on again. There's research which has looked at the paedophilia, and there's all different kinds of paedophilia, but let's say the specific paedophilia of being sexually aroused by children of the opposite sex. And a lot of these paedophiles say that, well, yeah, they were aroused by girls of their own age until they were, let's say, 12, and then their mum died or something, or they were sexually abused, and then they just stopped. They just became stuck at being sexually aroused by 12-year-old girls for the rest of their lives. So there's an environmental element there, but nevertheless, you have to have the other components of character that I talked about earlier for the fetish to develop. But this is an environmental component as to how it might develop. The other thing is that there seems to be evidence that for whatever fetish you can think of, there is an inversion of it. So Ray Blanchard has looked at this. Quite how this happens, I don't really understand. But there is, so you have the trauma of a person that is, let's say, sexually aroused by 3-year-old girls. But then a subsection of those that develop that fetish will be sexually aroused by the idea of being a 3-year-old girl, and obsessed with the idea of being a 3-year-old girl, and aroused by the idea of themselves being a 3-year-old girl, and will, think about the idea of themselves as a 3-year-old girl, and think about it more and more and more until they orgasm. So this is a subsection. This is an inversion of those of those fetishes. So you get this with most fetishes that you can think of. This inversion of the fetish, or even this inversion of the normal sexuality. So those then are the different kinds of reasons. I mean, there can be different reasons for different people why a fetish would develop. But I can't stress enough that there's lots of range. The literature at the moment would say there's lots of range within normal sexuality. The fact that somebody has a bit of a penchant for something is not a fetish. It becomes a fetish when it is exclusively that which sexually arouses them. And of course it can become very extreme if you have a very, very strong sex drive and you easily develop sexual associations, as is the case with these people that are high in autism or who feel feelings strongly or whatever. Then it's perfectly possible via a circuitous route that you can become sexually aroused by all kinds of peculiar things. And there are people that are sexually aroused by the idea of having bits of their body chopped off. Why? Well, I suppose that it might be something like that there's just about adaptive to be sexually aroused by people that are a bit disabled, because then you could easily dominate them. But then the inversion of that is that you want to be disabled yourself, and you become sexually aroused by the idea that you are disabled. And it can get to the point of being sexually aroused by objects that you then associate with the sexual arousal. So then you get to people being sexually aroused by certain, clothes, certain specific objects which they associate with something that is sexually arousing, and the object itself becomes part of their sex life. But the point is that the two key groups that tend to be associated with fetishes are sociosexual people and autistic people, and there is a degree to which those cross over. So I hope this is a bit of interest, and goodbye! Hello, hello, hello! The Jolly Heretic is an online public house which meets on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, in which we discuss the kind of based, fearless science which is increasingly expunged from our woke, joke universities. If you would like to help the Jolly Heretic public house, and there are many ways you can do so, please become one of my patrons on Subscribestar. Also, if you want to, you can donate to the channel using Odysee and Entropy, and you can also purchase Jolly Heretic merchandise, such as shirts and mugs. All of the links are in the description. Again, I'd be most violently grateful if you could assist the Jolly Heretic Public House, and I will see you all soon, and goodbye!